Welcome one. Welcome all. We have Michigan. Terrible state, but they did win the national championship last year in college football, so I guess I can't hate too much. But I am right on the cusp of Ohio, and so my allegiance is there. I am joined by Statsational Stats, who absolutely put on a display at the FanDuel final for baseball last week. I know that you guys had a great late stack that almost got you all the way to first place, right?
Yeah, it was fun. We had the Coors game, which I don't want to get too deep into baseball, but it's like the Coors game is just notoriously undervalued these days. Like everyone just kind of stays away from Coors. So we had Atlanta and Coors and Arizona with that. So two of the later games on the slate. So it was like it was going well because the pitchers that were highly used early were getting hit pretty good. So we knew, and we had a late pitcher going, Glasnow, and so we were feeling pretty good going into the late games. Of course, you got to get the run support, and pitchers got to pitch well. But we were in a good spot, and then we made it all the way up to third. So that was our best finish, believe it or not, in all the live finals that we've been to. So
that's crazy.
Yeah.
That is awesome to hear. And if for the people who don't know, I mean, third place is still $90K. So, $90K in a live final, that's a pretty good deal. And they're in Napa. And then we actually have a big time NASCAR slate today. I mean, it's one of the last few great NASCAR slates that we're going to have left before these prize pools get cut. And it should be noted that we only have a couple more shows after this, Stats, before this Sunday show actually dissolves into NFL season. So only a couple more shows left. After today, we got two more, so it should be a good one. Let's end on a high note here. These last three races. Marie Donyeezy is in the chat here as well. Hope you are doing well, Marie Donyeezy. Stats, tell me about this track. Yesterday's Xfinity race really felt, in a sense, like almost like a mini Daytona, just because of the builds for everyone. I think I didn't have a single guy in the top 10, for a lot of my lineups. And then today, I think that's going to be a little bit true, but at the same time, I still want a Dom. I still want Kyle Larson and stuff. But how are you approaching this slate, and what should we expect today?
Yeah, it's not quite Daytona. Speed wise, though, it's going to be close to Daytona. I mean, we got a fast track here. We've got it's a 2-mile track in Michigan, as you said, just 200 laps. So the Dom points not as plentiful as we may see at some of these other tracks. So yes, place differential, finish position will be key. And unlike Daytona or Talladega, we don't really expect too much in the way of wrecks here. I think they kind of run single file once they get straightened out on the restart. So I think the only, obviously, listen, it's NASCAR. We could have some major wrecks at any point, but I think the majority of the problems you'll probably see will be on the restarts. And I think after that, they'll kind of sort themselves out. And of course, late in the races, as we saw last week, things could always get a little crazy. It was nice to have a Logano bet at plus 1,400 and watch what happened to him last week. That was fun. So I think for the most part, we're going to see a pretty clean race. What you've got here, if you don't realize it, in the qualifying, they didn't qualify as they normally do. They had to go to the algorithm. So based on how these guys finished last week, certainly had an impact on where the algorithm placed them. So we do have a few guys who probably qualified here in a spot that they normally would not have qualified. They would have qualified a bit higher. So we're going to have some place differential value on a few of these guys as we'll go over them. But if you look at the betting markets, JGR is the favorite. Hendricks not too far behind. When you look at the manufacturers, you've got Toyota, obviously, with JGR as the favorite. They're almost an even money favorite in this race to win. And then you've got the Chevys behind them at about plus 175. So that's what the market is looking at right now. I think, as far as this race goes, we had some rain in the forecast. I don't know. I mean, there is potential that they could stop this thing. That's what they had yesterday, which is the reason that the qualifying and practices were all a bit off, and there was no qualifying. So we may get some spots where I don't think it's any significant rain from what I looked at before we got on here, to the point where I think there's a chance that they cancel the race or the race is shortened. I think they'll get it in. I think if they get hit with some rain, it's going to be really quick. At least that's what the radar looks like right now. So it shouldn't have too much of an impact on the race. But I do think, strategy is going to become more and more important as we get later into the season. We've only got 3 weeks left here until the playoffs. So you've got guys who are vying for playoff points, vying for a win as the only way to get into the playoffs. So it could be interesting as far as strategy is concerned. And I just heard I've been I've been kind of out of it most of the week. But Dillon, did they take away Dillon's playoff spot from last week?
I kind of completely forgot to bring that up though, because yes, you were on the Logano train there, and getting wrecked late like that. Then all of a sudden he slams into Hamlin and stuff. He's not going to be able to make the playoffs, is what they said. I mean, he can if he wins them, but
right.
He gets to keep the win. But his playoff eligibility was taken away for that, for that win, right? But if he wins this week, he's back in without issue.
Yeah, it's a weird thing about NASCAR. It's like half of these rules are just never written down. They just kind of, they make it up as they go. I mean, it was bullshit what he did, but you can't. It's just odd to me that that's not a rule. Like, I mean, it's a rule that you can't go wrecking people. But if that's the rule, then say he didn't win the race. I mean, I don't get that sometimes with NASCAR. They kind of went on the in between. They're like, all right, you could win the race, but you can't get in the playoffs. So they kind of played it both. They played both sides of the fence on it.
That was kind of my vibe. Is like, yeah, they definitely played both sides there in that sense. Where, yeah, if you're gonna let him keep his win, well, he should be able to make the playoffs in that case. But I'd rather see a playoffs, without him in it, because I wouldn't think he'd be a factor. But Who knows? Watch him have speed this week and screw us over again. I had 0 of him last week, and nothing on my radar at all. So the fact that he was up there and ended up getting the win, which he deserved it. I mean, I'll say it, like, Austin Dillon deserved the win. He was the winner with 2 to go. He was running away with it even. Obviously had a really bad restart and stuff. At the same time, Logano also deserved, his place there too. But yeah, I don't want to take anything away from Austin Dillon, but I'm definitely not thinking he's going to put back-to-back good weeks together. And we'll talk about him a little bit later. But stats, let's go ahead and jump into this 10K range here. We're going to talk about the top 4 drivers. And like you said, the order was determined by the algorithm. So what you're seeing here is you're seeing a very, very even display of I would say talent across the board, right? Like, you don't have too many guys who are just top tier starting like 30th or anything like that. The only guy who kind of comes close to that is Truex, where he's going to be one of the best plays in the entire slate. But when we look at guys like Larson, like Hamlin, like Blaney, 3 guys who can be very effective here. Larson is a former winner here, of course. Hamlin starting on the pole will be able to get those early Dom points potentially, like you said, if they do get into single file after the start. And then Blaney starting 8th. Tell me a little bit about this 10K range. What are you doing with Truex in a 20 max? Would you lock him? Like, that's a legit question here on a slate with not a ton of great place differential drivers.
Yeah, I think that you kind of took where I was going with it. I think we like to kind of give you guys advice on maybe 20 maxes and certainly anything less than that on a driver you could lock. I think this week Truex is that guy starting 24th. He's the one who's really based on the algorithm, I think is misplaced here. So I think Truex would be that guy. I wanted to just dive in just quick on some historical stuff at this track. So the guys who've started on the front row is usually one of them. It's almost 100% of the time you get one of them as a top 6 historically. So that's going back, 10 plus years. So that front row is pretty solid typically for points. So as we said, there's not a lot of Dom points to be had, but if you could chew up 40, 50 laps with a strong finish, someone like Hamlin, obviously capable of doing that, favored in the race, that could play out well for these guys over at on the top. And I believe last year, actually, we did not have anyone who started in the top. I'm scrolling back. It was, so last year was Buescher started 4th and Truex started 5th. So nobody who started on that front row. But historically, it's a pretty good chance that you're going to get someone in the front. And what we've also seen is something like on average 2 guys starting in the top 10 we've seen make it, and 4 starting in the top 20. So we really don't get typically a lot of guys starting too far back. And as you said, we don't have that many of these options outside of Truex today. So I think Truex is really a lock in cash games. He's a lock in GPPs. Playing 150, maybe you don't want to go all in there on Truex, but I think anything in the 20 max or less, I'm comfortable with that. So yeah, I mentioned Hamlin, who is going to be on the pole, is one of the favorites to win. These guys are all kind of bunched up at the top. Hamlin, Larson, and Bell, all really similar prices. Larson starts 5th. I think, with the ownership that we're looking at on both on Denny, here and on Larson. I mean, you're looking at probably 40+% ownership, maybe, high 30s to low 40s. What do we have over in on Sabre here as far as ownership on those guys?
Yeah,
so they're saying only
actually,
17. I think Larson gets a lot more than that.
I agree. I think Larson will get into the 30s. I think Hamlin kind of drops into that 30s. I think they're going to combine for a lot. And I think Blaney probably comes in around 20, and then Truex probably around 45, I would say 50 maybe. And this is the main tournament.
Yeah.
Single entry is going to be 70%.
Well, yeah, I agree. I think Blaney's going to be low there as well. But even if Blaney gets up to the high teens, 20% range, I think you're getting some value there based on, I mean, just look at the price in the betting markets. He's not that far behind. Like, is he going to win this race? Or is a Larson going to win this race twice as often, or a Hamlin twice as often than Bell? I don't know. I don't think so. So I think when you look at it from a percentage basis and the ownership values, I think Blaney's not a bad pivot here. If you're making a single entry, I don't think it's bad to pivot to Blaney. I think he's got, look, it's like you mentioned, it could be a little bit like Daytona. And if that's the case and we're running fast out there, I don't mind Blaney at all. So I think Blaney is a decent pivot off of those guys. I think you're kind of starting and the thing is, there's going to be some value here. So you could take two of these guys in the 10K plus range, I think, and still find some value down at the bottom, as we're going to get to in a minute. So I have no problem playing two of these guys. I think Truex is your lock button guy that you're going to want to put in there. And then if you want to take that leverage spot, since you're going to be obviously no leverage there on the Truex play, and you want to kind of get a little bit different, I don't think Blaney's a bad option.
Yeah, I'm with you. I like most of these guys. I'm actually like, Hamlin's my odd man out. When I'm just building a 20 max and stuff, you got to make some uncomfortable decisions. But Hamlin's my guy out. I actually prefer Larson over him starting there at fourth. Like, I just think that we're due for a Larson win in a sense too. I think Larson and his history here, it speaks for itself too. What he's been able to do, where he's a tier above Hamlin in my eyes in terms of this slate, right? And I don't think he's going to come in lower than half the ownership of Hamlin. Hamlin will get a little extra bump because he's on the pole, but I'm willing to kind of just go ahead and say Hamlin, I won't have any of him in the in the $4 or in the 20 max at all. Probably won't have him run 20 lineups in the 15. Probably won't have him much at all. Blaney, I'd rather have a little bit of, like you said. It's just getting that leverage. I'm already going to have a super talky start. I'm going to be locking in Truex across those 20 teams. And I really like what Jake said. Fade Truex. He's been terrible as chalk all year. Trust me, someone who's played Truex so many times this year, I know it's been terrible. I'll go into a message last week from we have to make a pact to never play Truex again, to a friend and I. And then sure enough,
until he's the chalk this week. Yeah.
Sure enough, 1 week later, here we go. We're back on Truex. And it's just, there's not really any slam dunk place differential plays except for him. He could get 12th and maybe be in the winner. I mean, and that's a very conservative projection too. Like, if he gets 8th, he's definitely in the winner, I think. But 12th could even be in the winner. So this is definitely like a little bit of that.
Sorry, I didn't mean to jump on you there.
Oh, you're good.
The one thing with Hamlin, I'd be really shocked if he's not the guy who jumps out early. Look at who next to him. He's got the car he owns, and he's got a teammate behind them. So that's a really good starting spot for one of the best drivers in the world right now. So so I'd be shocked if Denny does not at least bust out there early and pick up a lot of these Dom points.
Yeah, that's my risk, right, when I'm fading Denny. But I do want at least one Dom. And I think a maximum of 2 Doms. And what these guys are going to kind of check the boxes. Larson and Blaney for me. Hamlin, he might be the odd man out, but it does not mean he's a bad play. But really, I just kind of got to make those decisions. I do want 1 Dom minimum. I'm going to go all the way up into the top 15. And we'll talk about Keselowski next. We'll go into the 9K range. If you want to add anything in about these 10K guys, go ahead. But we'll talk about this 9K range now. We got Keselowski starting 15th, who's going to be very, very chalky again. William Byron, Chase Elliott, Tyler Reddick, and Christopher Bell. So like you said, teammate right behind Hamlin, and then the car he owns starting second there. Do you envision either of them kind of getting out to the lead there, potentially early, potentially being, very good leverage off Hamlin, or do you prefer to stay away here?
No, I think if you're talking between Bell and Reddick.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I like Bell. I like both of these guys, to be honest with you. So I do think, you can drop down into maybe not play any of those guys up at the top outside of a Truex. And even if you want to fade a Truex, which I just don't think is the right play this week, as bad as Truex has done for us. But I think you could start with Truex as your most expensive driver and then come on down into this range. And I like both Bell and Reddick. So, I mean, Bell basically gets the third place qualified. So he's going to be running right behind, like I said, Hamlin at the start. And I mean, he's been great all summer long on the short tracks. Not as good necessarily on the larger tracks, but I think he's easily in contention here for a top 5. He's one of the favorites to win the race. I mean, like I said on FanDuel, if you look at it, Hamlin, Larson at 450, Bell's plus 500. Really, not much of a difference. I think it's a pretty good fade where you're going to get Bell at much lower ownership than you will, I think, Larson or Hamlin. So I don't mind that play at all to get off of some of the chalkier guys at the top for the same price in the betting markets. And I think, Reddick, I think, is not a bad play either. So start second. Like I said, he's got his owner net right next to him on the front. But yeah, I mean, he's had the intermediate speed, right? So he's been right behind Larson and Hamlin all year. So I think it's another guy who is not going to get a ton of ownerships. I think he's going to probably be in the low 20% as far as ownership goes. He did get up to the lead last year here and led some laps. So I think the potential's there while his finishes don't look as good. Just kind of see where he was. I mean, actually, his finishes on the large tracks this year have been really good. He's got in his last 5, he's got all top 6s. His last 4 were all top 6s, and he's got some just terrible history here. So I think that's going to maybe play into the fact that he's going to be lesser owned. So I think both Bell and Reddick become a decent pivot play. I'll quickly go over Elliott. I think is just kind of. I think Elliott's going to be right about where he is. He starts 6th, and he probably finishes somewhere between 5th and 10th. I don't think he really pushes maybe to get a win here, so I'm not all that crazy about Elliott. Byron's interesting. He's probably going to be the lowest owned of all these guys. His price is starting to fall from where it has been most of the year, and I don't expect much out of Byron either. I think Keselowski now becomes maybe my favorite play in this entire group. Starts 15th. That's kind of been a good spot historically at this track for scoring in DFS. Great on the intermediate track, and I think with the Fords having done so well, we didn't really talk about that, but Fords have dominated here. Now, a lot of that was Harvick, who's not in the race. Yeah, there you go. Someone just mentioned it. They have won 9 straight times. Like I said, a lot of that was Harvick, but I think you've got to give the Fords a look here. And Keselowski, I think, is one of the better options starting 15th, and then we'll get down to Logano after that at 8,800, starts right in front of him. But I think Keselowski at 15th becomes a really strong play, and I think I don't know where his ownership is. Let me see. I'm looking at your screen there. We've got him at 20. Is that 28%? So I think that's probably about right. I think he gets owned there, which I think is still a little bit light. So I don't.
I think it's light. I think it's going to be 35 to 40.
Yeah, that's where I'm going to want to be on my 150 builds. Yeah. But I like Keselowski quite a bit in that Ford and with this intermediate package. So I think Keselowski becomes one of the stronger plays. And I think you've got more of a pivot play. You would take either Bell or Reddick. I wouldn't play both if you're looking to maybe pivot off of some of those more expensive guys up at the top.
Yeah, very much so. And I'm with you. Keselowski definitely feels like the best play in this range. I'll say this, Bump God. I'm not going to have any Chase Elliott, but if you have Chase Elliott, you don't really need to get different elsewhere. I think even that 16% is a little bit high on him. I think he'll come in potentially like 10% owned or whatever. So if you do have that conviction there, I don't mind it at all. And you can kind of play a little bit more chalky after going Chase Elliott because, not that you need a ton of DOMs or whatever, but you at least get different at the top there. That could be very key. Absolutely. Byron almost following the same script as last year's stats where he starts off really hot, wins a lot of races early on, kind of drops off. But at the same time, 9.1K for Byron is so cheap. It just is. And this is another guy where you talked about it with Blaney. Like, does Blaney win, so-and-so it's many times over a certain amount of races, right? It makes it worth the leverage. Like, Byron also probably doesn't even need really a win here. Like if he got a top 3, that's probably good enough at 9,100, where place differential drivers aren't really just in a vast amount really at all. So I'm definitely down for Byron. I do like him over Elliott. I do like him over Reddick and Bell. And the thing is just committing at the top of your stats, but I don't mind spreading it around. Like if I didn't have that conviction on Larson, I think I would spread it around to this like top 4 pretty evenly. But I am going to be overweight on Larson, and what that is going to kind of have me off Denny, like we already talked about, and then I'm going to be kind of off Reddick and Bell. And this is just for 20 max too. Like for 150, that's a completely different story. But for 20 max, I got to make those stands. But I'm with you. What we saw from Bell last week too was very impressive. He got a little unlucky there with was it last week, the one he really had a fast car, right?
I was away. I was in Napa, so I didn't get to watch. I watched the end of that race. I didn't get to watch the entire race.
Yeah, he jumped out, and him and Suarez were 2 of the best cars there and stuff. Or it could have been the other race too. Well, that was the race with the option tire. So yeah, it was the last race. Like he had a lot of pace last week, so I don't want to completely ignore it. I might have like a 1 lineup out of Bell out of 20. But Reddick is a guy I am going to fade today as well. Let's go ahead and jump on down to the 8K range here. Joey Logano, Chris Buescher. So, we got the Fords starting to stack up here. You got Ty Gibbs starting 19th. All 3 of these guys are fine, very fine. And honestly, I'm not going to have much of Bubba. Ross Chastain, does have success here a little bit. He's not a bad play at all. And a great odds to win. I think Ross Chastain's odds to win were 10-1, which is very good in this range. And then Kyle Busch. But I look at the top here. I look at Logano. I look at Buescher. I look at Gibbs. Those are the 3 who kind of stand head and shoulders above the rest in this 8K range. Not going to have much interest in Bubba. And then maybe a splash Chastain for me. What about you, Stats?
Yeah, I mean, we can start with Logano again and that Ford. So plus 2,000 starts in the 14th spot. I kind of like Keselowski a little bit more here. The history for Logano is decent at this track. Let me just bring that up. Logano here has been, he's got a 4th place finish in the next gen car 2 years ago, had a 14th finish last year. Logano's, he's just a steady guy for me. He always winds up he always finds his way into my line. He always finds his way into my bets. And somehow, and I can't tell you how many times crazy stuff has happened to me when I bet Logano. But yeah, I think it's a fine play at the ownership, which is going to be pretty muted, I think. Again, I just prefer Keselowski, who will be higher owned than Logano here. Buescher, I think Buescher's kind of flying under the radar and has potential to surprise us at this track. I mean, he's not getting bet in the betting markets plus 3,500, even plus 6,000 over at BetMGM if the aggregator I'm looking at is correct. So I think you're getting a pretty good price. He's going to have pretty not great ownership. I think a decent GPP play. He is the defending champion here, right? From last year, though. So that's like back-to-back weeks that he is defending champion. He wasn't great to win that one last year. It was one of those where he kind of was able to win on a restart late in the race. So, you can take that win with a grain of salt. But I think another decent play for, I think certainly cash games for a Buescher starting 18th. I think he's a pretty good cash option, and I sprinkling him in there for GPPs. I don't mind it at all. I think Ty Gibbs, just been, he's another one of those guys. We've been high on him quite a bit. He's had some pretty good starting positions where we thought maybe he'd be able to win the race. Just been very inconsistent. But I mean, I keep going back to the well. I just think he's in a good spot here at the 19th starting place, and 19th kind of lets you know where he's been, since this is the algorithm that picked the starting positions. Kind of lets you know where he's been all season long here. But I think it's pretty good GPP play for Gibbs. I think he could surprise us to the upside. Let me see what the betting market has him at now. So he's another guy at that like plus 3,500 range. So not really expecting him to win. We don't need him to win, of course, starting where he's starting in the 19th spot. So I think Gibbs again becomes a pretty nice GPP play. Bubba Wallace not going to be high owned, starting 5th. I think he's got the potential for a top 5, certainly a top 10. I just don't see the win upside for Bubba, so I'm going to be fairly low on him starting 5th, and I think you do run some risk where he could move back in the pack. So I don't particularly love Bubba in this one. I think Chastain, though, Going to be a good play. Should get some ownership. Where do we have him at? What do I got? About 22. Yeah, I was thinking 25% on Chastain. So that's about where I'm looking as well. So he's in a Chevy, which they're getting a little love in the betting markets. It is Trackhouse though, but he had the fastest car in practice. As much you want, as much weight as you want to put into the practice that was a little messed up. Yeah, I mean, I think there's a chance here that Chastain finds his way into the winner. I think the problem I would be if I'm like manually building a couple 2-3 lineups, it's going to be tough to put 3 of the guys starting in the top. Although we have seen on average close to like 2 of these guys starting in the top 10 make it to the lineup. So I think you've got to kind of figure out what you're doing with this top 10. If you want to play 3 guys in, I think you could probably sneak in a guy at Chastain in there, but I feel comfortable doing that with maybe the lesser options. So if I'm playing, a lot more salary, the guys at the top, like a Larson and a Hamlin, which I probably wouldn't want to play both of those guys together. But if you're doing something like that, maybe, maybe then you don't want to go that third option. But if you're going to go with some of these cheaper guys, we'll throw Bubba out of there. If you do have that opinion on Chase Elliott, maybe then, you like Chase Elliott, maybe you like Byron as well. 2 real low-owned guys. Maybe you could throw Chastain in there, but I think that'll certainly be a unique lineup. That's for sure. Having those 3 all in the same lineup, but you're going to have to go super chalky elsewhere. I think it just winds up being, you could play Chastain, and I would probably stick with 2, max 3 in the top 10.
Yep, I'm with you there. This is not great news from Garrett. Weather is starting to look worse by the minute. So we might not be racing today. Last year was a Monday finish as well. So we might see a slight repeat of history too. So could even start. And then since they don't have lights there, they got to get it done before sunset or else it'll be pushed to Monday. I have a good question here. Right? Well, it's more self-proclaimed good because I see these comments, right? Wallace Gibbs racing for a playoff spot. Well, so are Chastain and Buescher. When you look at it, from a DFS perspective, obviously a crash would, we got 3 races left to determine the playoffs, I think. A crash would kind of greatly cripple your hopes if you're trying to make it. Do you view those guys any differently? Those who are fighting for a playoff spot, more specifically like Chastain, Gibbs, Buescher, Wallace, like, does that push them up in your mind, or do you just kind of play it like an independent, case? Like, this week they could be good, next week just kind of business like normal almost.
I think you could give them a little bit. It's a GPP bump, right? Because I think you can give them a little bit of a bump because that's what we're looking for in GPPs. We're looking for the kind of boom bust type of drivers in all sports, really, all players in the GPPs. So I just think you want to kind of manage how many of those guys that you're going to put together, maybe. So you don't want to take all the guys who need to win. Maybe you just take one of those guys who need to win. They're going to, when you have to win, it's not just how aggressive they're going to drive. It's the strategy. Some of these guys are going to go on some crazy strategies, which means that's more risk. But the more risk, the better the reward, or you could finish really low. So, I don't know if you want to really stack your entire lineup with those type of guys. But if you could catch the right guy who who gets on the right pitch strategy, gets a little lucky, and finds his way up at the top late. I mean, that's part of the thing with NASCAR. We analyze it. We look at past races, and we're like, okay, this guy's got a bad track history based on 2-3 races. But man, there's so much luck that's involved in these races when the cautions happen on the pitch strategies and things like that. So crazy things can happen at any of these tracks. So I do like looking at who needs to win. They will play it differently. I think more importantly is who doesn't need to win, because those are the guys that you really want to maybe knock down a little bit. Like, they've got their win, they're in the playoffs, they're just kind of running now with not necessarily being as aggressive. So I think it plays more of a factor on those type of guys, where maybe you want to get a little lesser on those guys than you do. That's kind of my position on Chase Elliott here, where I just don't think he's going to be the guy out there looking to get this. Looking to get a win and kind of fighting and doing everything he can to do it. I think he just kind of runs a solid race, finishes in the top 10, and that's it. So that's why I'm not really high on a guy like Elliott. So I think it's more to look at the guys who are in, and maybe downgrade some of those guys who are just kind of starting, maybe starting in the 7th through 15th or 20th or something like that, and they're just not going to really push it. They're just going to run well all day, and then if they find themselves up near the front, they'll give it a shot. But I think they're just going to try to keep the car clean and just run their race today.
Yeah, it makes sense there. And I was wondering that kind of the same thing where, especially when we get down to the nitty gritty, isn't it like Daytona, the last one before the playoffs start? So you could have 3 guys vying for a win there, trying to get the dub, and then that's really boom or bust at that point, where a win would have to take you there. I also want to applaud as we get into the 7K range, Daniel Suarez. I was on Trackhouse a little bit last time out, and him switching to the option tire first, getting out to the lead, getting a playoff point for winning the stage, like that was a very impressive stuff from Daniel Suarez last week. And that's the type of risk that you're talking about, right? Like, not that he was on the brink of the playoffs. He already has that win in Atlanta this year, but it's that type of strategy to where Suarez was the winner last week, or not the winner in the winning lineup last week, because he switched to the option tire first. He racked up a million fastest laps, a million laps led, and all of a sudden you're just looking at it where Suarez had no choice but to be optimal. He could have wrecked even and still almost been in the winner. That's how much of a lead he had, just in terms of just raw fantasy points. And that's the type of luck that you're talking about. But like, we don't have the option tire this week, but we do get a good range here. We get Alex Bowman, who I think is one of the better plays, probably one of the best mid-range plays on the entire slate. If you were just looking 8K and down, Bowman might be the best one here. 30% ownership does feel very accurate in that regard. Suarez again, 7,500. 12th is a little bit too high. Barry 16th. We heard about the Fords earlier. That could be a case for him. And then Cindric starting 23rd. A very small range here, but is it kind of Bowman and kind of move on for you too? I mean, that's kind of how I see it here.
Bowman for sure, but I would throw Cindric in the mix as well. I think in this package, he's finished now top 20 in 6 straight races in this package. So he's starting in the 23rd spot in a Ford, as we talked about how well the Fords have run at this track. I don't know. I think Cindric's definitely in play. So I like Cindric. I know what you're talking about with Bowman as well. I think Bowman's more of a cash guy. I don't know if Bowman's got the upside that Cindric does. I think Cindric has more upside in this race, to be honest with you. So I'm more, it's Cindric for me, then Bowman. Suarez, I just think, listen, he overqualifies here because of how well he did last week. So that 12th starting spot, I think he's a fade for me. And he looked terrible in practice, although I think he'll probably be able to pick up something from Chastain, who was really good in practice, but I still don't think Suarez has a shot to get into a winning lineup in GPPs here today. Barry, I think we're learned from Barry here. He's a short track guy, not this long track. So I'm going to go with fading Barry as well and just say, we'll play him when we get back to short tracks. But right now, I think we can get off on Barry.
Yeah, I'm with you there. Perfect. I don't really got anything to add. I do like that Cindric tidbit. He was kind of hitting as a last man for me. So might even bump him up when I do these lineups here in a few. So 6K range now. It's a crowded one. Stenhouse starting 30th. Checked a lot of boxes for me. He's going to be a very strong play. We had a question about Gragson earlier too. Thoughts on Gragson for a punt play from Jim Parrish. Gragson's going to be a very fine play. It is not quite a punt at 6.8K, but it's still a good, still a good option, still a good, decent salary saver. Eric Jones as well is in this mix. And then you have a guy like Michael McDowell who kind of graded out well. And the reason why he graded out well stats is because his odds were, pretty solid in this range. I think only Austin Dillon had better odds to win from the 7K range and down. We're not really on McDowell a ton. You mentioned it, moving teams and stuff like that. You're not going to be on him for much of the remaining bit of the season. Briscoe starting 21st. I don't know. To me, I rank this range Stenhouse, Gragson, Jones, and then I think, honestly, I might avoid it and just go into this 5K range that we got afterwards, which is loaded, I think. But really, what's your thoughts on the 6K range?
Yeah, I kind of agree with where you're going here. For me, it's I think they're all kind of close. Stenhouse, Jones, and Gragson. I think those are the guys that we're looking at. Maybe you could throw some Dillon in there as well. For Hocevar, I think we could kind of toss out. Just overqualifies here, starting 11th. Just there's no upside there at all. Austin Dillon starts 10th again because he won that race last week, but I I just don't foresee him getting anywhere near the near enough points to be viable for this one. McDowell, he's never had a top 20 in at this track, so I'm not too high on McDowell. Like you said, you mentioned it, switching teams next year. I think the focus is obviously going to be on his teammate Dillon, so that's why I'm going to throw some Dillon in there. Starts 20th, not the greatest starting spot for Dillon. He was the thing with Dillon. Again, we could take the practice with a grain of salt, but he was the worst in practice this week. So we'll see how that pans out there. So he's kind of I've got those three guys. I like Gragson, Jones, and Stenhouse in here. And then kind of the next tier down for me would be Dillon, with the rest of these guys, I think, kind of fading. You could fade McDowell, Briscoe, Dillon, and Hosever. Gragson's got 4 top 10 finishes with this package this season. So he wrecked early at Pocono. So we didn't really get to see how good he would be there at another fast track. So I think there's some good upside starting 25th from a Gragson. I think the guy with the most upside is Ricky Stenhouse starting 30th. That's a pretty good starting spot for us. And so I think we've got potential there. Let me look at his odds currently on, unless you have it up here.
Yeah, Stenhouse's odds on DraftKings Sportsbook is 130-1.
I'm missing. Yeah, so I think that's pretty good odds for where we're starting at 30th spot at this price. So I kind of like Stenhouse is my guy that I like in this range the most. And then probably, Gragson and Jones are going to be close after that. So Jones is good on these big tracks and in this package. So I think it's another guy starting 25th. Starting 28th that has some potential. I just think this is a really good range. I think we're going to get at least one of these guys, if not two of these guys, get into the winning lineup. So that's why I think we've got some options even cheaper as well. Yeah. So I think that's why we could play this as with some of the really pricey guys, and then get down to some of these cheap guys and maybe a little bit of a stars and scrubs type of lineup.
Yeah, I'm with you. And when you say, guys like Gragson and stuff, I'm with you 100%. And Stenhouse, I think two of those guys could. And then you talk about the 5K range. This is why I have no issue just jamming in the studs. I know that the mid tier, I like Bowman a little bit. You talked about Busher too, where you said you have plus 6,000 number on Busher somewhere. He has 13-1 on DK, by the way. So
yeah, that's why I don't know if it's off. Yeah, it was on BetMGM had it.
I want to check BetMGM for sure then, because 13-1 on DraftKings is like one of the best, one of the lowest odds to win, I should say. So 60-1 would be an absolute steal. So I'm going to check that out here in just a second. But yeah, I'm with you. Everything that you said there in the 6K range. Let's go ahead and jump in to the 5K range. I did have that review a huge Dillon guy. I will say this. I like the cojones on someone who's willing to wreck Logano and Hamlin in one swing. Having that race on, seeing him do it, where you're just all you can do is scream like, "Oh!" like not once but twice. Like, "Oh!" like I gotta respect it. Like, look, he might not make the playoffs or whatever, but he gets to keep the win. Next year when we're going over that track and stuff, we're going to be talking about how Austin Dillon's the reigning champion. He's done well at that track. Let's go ahead and get into this 5K range now. Justin Haley hasn't been great, like in this type of package, as you mentioned. Like, when you bring up Pocono and stuff, his speed there was not great. The next week after the Brickyard, the speed was not great. So Haley's someone where he's going to be fine starting 29th, but on other weeks, like where I've been jamming him in the last month, and it's kind of worked out, kind of not. Like he hasn't been getting his top 15 upside that we saw a little earlier in the year. But I'm probably not going to be as aggressive on Haley today. But still, Allmendinger starting 35th. Nemechek starting 30th. Nemechek, how many times is he going to start in the back of the pack stats? And is he going to pay off at any point in time? Please, I'll keep waiting. Corey LaJoie also starting 31st. Like, you have good names down here to where, like you said, I think the 6K range is, slightly better in terms of Stenhouse and Gragson, I think are a little bit more comfortable clicks. Eric Jones, a more comfortable click. But you do have guys who can definitely be in the winner and definitely just spend up with, guys like LaJoie who, pro tip, is in Big T's core. So what do you think about this?
LaJoie is?
Yeah, LaJoie is.
Interesting.
31st.
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't mind LaJoie. I think I'm surprised he didn't go with Allmendinger I think that's where most people are going to go down in this 5K range. I think, with pretty good reason for it. Kaulig announced that he's going to be racing for them next year, so that's good for Dinger. But I think good practice, good car in practice, starts 35th. I think you have to absolutely play him in cash games, and I think he's a solid, real strong play here for GPPs. The question, I think, becomes, do you need a couple of guys down here? We like so many guys in the sub 7K range. How many can you really use? So if you do want to maybe pivot off of Allmendinger and you just want to play one guy down in the 5K range, I think Haley becomes a decent play as well. I like LaJoie, but not as much as I like Dinger or Haley. Haley's been consistently right in that 20th place in this package, but I think he does have you mentioned he really hasn't hit that upside. I still think he does have top 15 upside. So I think at that price, getting us a top 15 finish would be fantastic. And I think he's got the ability to do that. Someone mentioned Hemrick. I'm not really too high on Hemrick here. I'm not sure if you're going to really have to get down to the 5,100, depending on what your build is, but you probably won't need to get to 5,100 to fit something in. But he's got 4 top 20 finishes at intermediate tracks. But I think a little bit of that is luck. And so he's teammates with Allmendinger, and they looked good in practice for sure. But I think you're going to probably want to take Allmendinger here at starting 35th over Hemrick in the 32 spot. I just don't know how much of an advantage you get pivoting off of Allmendinger. I don't. What do we have his ownership at? Because I'm thinking he's probably 20%.
It says 10%, but I think it's going to be north of 20.
Yeah,
I think
20. I don't know how much of an edge you get. It's going to be really based on, if you're going super chalky up at the top and that's where you want to kind of differentiate on the Hemrick, then that's fine. But I think if you're not playing all the chalky, more expensive guys, then I think you just go with Allmendinger here. I think he's the safest bet down in this price range. I think guys like Burton, I would just totally toss out. Where you mentioned Nemechek, looks good. He kind of a guy that I think a lot of people are going to be tempted to play, but he has not finished well at all in this intermediate package. He has not been better than 28th. I'm not expecting a whole lot out of him today at this track, so I'm not going to be on Nemechek. I think you're perfectly good fading him, not taking him in any of your lineups. Zane Smith's another guy that I won't have much of, and Priest, again, not the type of track that he particularly likes. So I think down in this range, we're really looking at Dinger, LaJoie, and Haley for me. Those are going to be the 3 guys that I'm focused on.
Yeah, it's funny about Nemechek. Like in his last 10 races, he's gotten inside the top 25 once, and it was an 8th place finish. It is funny. Like, he just hasn't been good, and he keeps starting in the back, and he always profiles halfway decent. But yeah, I've kind of been in the prove it stage with him a little bit, and I think I'm going to stay in that stage. Hemrick's fine too. Like you said, like, do you really need to go down to the 5,100 range? Not really, but I can see it. Like, if you're playing Hemrick and he allows you to fit everything you want, I got 0 issue with that. I do prefer Allmendinger straight up, just like you do. It's 12:45. Let's go ahead and get into our drivers of the day. I'm going to sort by ownership here. So we got, looks about a dozen drivers who we can't select. So Chastain is the cutoff. You know what? I'm not going to allow us to say Larson. I'm just not. I think he's going to come in closer to 30. So I'm going to above that line. And I think that's it. I don't think Blaney's going to get up to 20. So let's go ahead and go through your driver of the day under 20% owned for you.
All right, I'm gonna mix it up. How about you give me the driver of the day, because I want to look at this one, because I don't feel good while you're going. I'm gonna try to pull Saber up and look at which ones I could choose from.
Oh, very much so. So we're not going to be able to say Allmendinger either. So I'm going to go ahead and bump him up. So it's a very chalky start, right? Like, Truex going to be, your main guy and stuff. I'm going to have Larson. I'm going to see if a guy who is going to make my main lineup is lower than 20% owned. I'm checking right now here, stats. Hold on. I usually let you go first, so then I can.
I know. You know what? I've got my guy, so I'm going to go.
Oh, you got your guy bet.
I've got my guy. I'm going to take Christopher Bell here.
Oh, okay. I like it. Good leverage play there.
Yeah, I like that one as a leverage. Yeah, exactly. A bit of a leverage play. And when you look at the odds in the market, I mean, he's basically right there with the 2 favorites who are going to be twice as owned. So I like Bell as a pivot play here at the sub 20%.
Perfect. I think I am actually going to kind of follow a similar path. I do like following a similar path to you. I think I'm going to be fairly overweight on a guy like William Byron today, starting ninth. I think it's a decent leverage play. I don't think he needs to win. I just think he needs to get a top 4, top 3. If the race kind of, depends on a little bit of a pit stop too. It always helps a guy like Byron and stuff. So I'll go Byron, a decent leverage. I do like Bell a little bit more for that leverage that you said though, where Hamlin's probably going to be 3 times as owned as Bell. So that could be a very, very good leverage play there. Byron inside the 10th. Like I said, I'm not going to go with more than 2 guys inside the top 10 personally, but you can definitely play, 2 guys plus Keselowski, who I consider a dom as well. So thank you all for joining us. Good luck today. 2 more shows after this one, and then we'll be right in the football season. Have a good one, and bye-bye.